shit.
Okay.
Got it.
That's better than my thinking of it a half hour from now.
Well,
Way
you're
better.
forgiven. You're an old man. What do you expect?
Well, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Aren't we all?
Aren't we all? In fact, I've started walking with a cane.
Oh, have you really? Oh,
Yeah, not all the time, but I've been having some sciatica problems.
Ouch.
So, and it's going away, but for a time there, I was kind of dependent on it for a couple of weeks. But anyway, just for balance purposes.
I've had the same experience of being on it and off of it.
Yeah, I'm
Also,
thinking it's a good idea for balance.
I just saw a lady in the supermarket who had a cane that was in the form of a candy cane.
Oh, neat.
Oh,
that's holiday.
hold on, Ned.
Yeah. Hello, Ned.
Hi, Ned.
hey
Hey,
Ned.
Ned.
Hi, Tom, Tim, John, Frank,
Hi.
Bob.
How are you?
Pardon me?
How are
How
you?
are you?
Oh, I could be better.
So we missed you, Ned. We missed you last week. You had some lame excuse about not feeling very good, and half of us on the call. I hope you didn't watch the video. We're sort of making, well, at least I was making fun of you for being such a wuss.
I feel like a wuss right now, actually.
Do you really?
It's been about now. George is getting this PET
PET scan.
scan, and is in sequence. I believe early afternoon he's going to be talking with his Dr. Barry Schwitzer is his name. He's
the coach of Oklahoma.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Like Oklahoma, right?
Football coach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's an oncologist and a hematologist, hemochromatologist. I don't know. And he'll be getting some strategies about how to deal with what's been found. And they still, by that time, we hope that they're going to have a good, strong sense of where the origin of this carcinoma is.
Mhm.
And so the hematologist and George and Betty will put together a strategy to it'd probably take a couple of hours, they said, to deal with this.
Yeah, George
Tim,
called me about an hour ago.
Pardon?
Maybe George also called me about an hour ago.
Oh, good.
I think they were on their way.
Yeah.
So basically, what he had to say was what you have said.
Okay.
Not to put a fine point on it, Ned, you called it a carcinoma.
Yes.
Is that the term you meant to use?
Yes. Well, it's got some kind of prefix.
Adenocarcinoma, I think
What is it, Tom?
Adenocarcinoma.
That's it. Adenocarcinoma.
But
Okay.
isn't carcinoma just a kind of a generic term for cancer?
It's a very not very well. It's
more
generic.
scientific.
Yes. It's generic. That's right. And it's
it
occurs in 90.
Some people, George himself included, would insist on saying fetus instead of unborn baby.
Well, isn't it the Latin word for cancer? Carcinoma.
I think so.
Yeah.
The reason I asked that is I always inappropriately, and now I can see carcinoma was always a skin cancer in my way of thinking, but obviously it has a broader meaning.
That's correct. I've had a Mohs technique excising of a carcinoma that I had in my cheek here. Well, that's what I was given, and apparently carcinomas, consistent with what we're talking about now, are in 90+% of most cancers.
Okay.
And while this could be something very bad, like in the prostate, the origin, it could also be something that's treatable. I don't, there's a spectrum of what it means to be treatable. So they're hoping to determine that today and put together a strategy. Hey,
Hello,
Gary.
Gary.
Tim, is there some way for you to move, because the
light is behind you, Tim, and there's
Right.
very little
Okay.
light on your face.
Can't see
You
you.
can't see your beloved, beautiful countenance. That's a little better.
Well, let me turn on a lamp and see if that helps.
That would probably help a lot.
Yeah, I agree. There
Yeah.
we go.
Okay.
Welcome
I
back.
would change, I go back to the other one, Tim.
Oh my God,
Gary,
we can see him.
All right, so hang on.
Well, Gary,
Better?
to
Better?
welcome, to bring you up to speed,
Yeah.
George Crook is now going in for PET scan today,
Right.
right now.
Right
And-
now, yeah.
And he and the doctors are going to do a, hold on just a minute. Ned, you take over from here,
Okay.
bringing Gary up to speed.
Yeah, just to bring me up to speed, Ned.
Yeah, sure. Betty, and did you get my message? Oh, yes, you did, because you responded. Right now, the PET scan is being done for George.
Yeah.
And within a few hours, George and Betty will be meeting with Barry Schwitzer, who is George's oncologist, and also is the term hematologist?
Yeah.
And so he
That's a specialist in blood.
Yes, George some time ago mentioned to all of us that he had hemochromatosis, and it was found. This is 15 or so years ago, 12 years, and because it was caught so early, and that is eminently treatable. It was treated and taken care of. A year and a half or so before that, my sister-in-law's husband had hemochromatosis, but the doctor was not savvy enough to find it, and he died
Oh,
of it. And there was some to do about that. So and now George is anemic. So this hemochromatosis has been really just 180 degrees turned around. And so he's got this blood issue and the back issue, which they've not yet pinpointed, which he can't walk now without a cane, and then it's a very difficult thing. He refuses to use a walker.
yeah.
And Betty's a little upset with him about that.
Right.
So tomorrow I'm going to spend some time with him at his place, and I'm taking my walker, the one that they gave me when I had my knee done, and say, hey, let's take a walk. See if I can get him to use that thing. And a lot depends on the diagnosis today. George is being a real trooper about this. He says he's not all that emotionally involved with this, except that a couple of days ago he said that he was overwhelmed, as I mentioned to you guys.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And I think part of it was attempting in some way to find the most bright silver lining around this cloud. So he's got his back issue that's very serious, blood issue,
Anemia.
and anemia, and now this cancer, and what else is it? Is there? Oh, we just had this heart.
The pacemaker.
Pacemaker,
Yeah,
Yeah. So there are any number of things.
it's just a lot of things, yeah. It's a lot of things on your plate.
Yeah.
What
I
jumps out
don't
at
recall,
me?
Ned, does George have
a spiritual director, or are you filling that role?
I,
Shit.
I
My
think
God.
I think a spiritual director needs not to be so involved. I do that for a few folks. Some of the nights, and a professed atheist, but he's coming along. We don't really have we usually, for whatever reason, wind up with the same spiritual director, like we did with Father Herb Ryan. But right now, neither of us have a spiritual director, and it's I'm going to run around and find one.
Well, I think he has, I think all of us kind of serve something of a spiritual direction
I agree.
function, because spiritual direction is primarily accompaniment and companionship.
Exactly. Yeah, I was
So,
thinking of that too.
I think that we are part of it. The other person would be, he's got a brother-in-law who's a bishop,
Yeah.
who I'm sure he's in touch with.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, George
Ned,
George cites conversations with his brother-in-law
Yeah.
frequently.
Yeah.
And on issues that touch the spiritual realm. if
Yeah.
you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ned, just for my own clarity, the PET scan now determines, it tries to determine what direction the cancer has gone.
Well, it's a common
Right.
thing to
Right.
attempt to find and identify and put together some kind of treatment plan. This PET scan, and from that, can you guys see me?
Yeah, perfectly fine.
Very clear.
I can't see you. There we go.
Have any of you ever had a PET scan?
All right.
I'd never heard of it.
I have. I've had a PET scan.
I've had CT scans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have two. I've had two within the last say 3 years.
PET scans, Tom?
PET scans, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they're actually PET/CT scan.
Right.
And what they do is put a probably kind of a sugar-based sort of radioactive tracer in your blood, which the characteristic of the cancer cells is that they are greedy, they're hungry, they use more of the body's resources than normal cells, so that within 5 minutes or so, there's that radioactive stuff concentrates wherever there is this excessive activity.
Wow.
And so it can actually effectively pinpoint cancer wherever it might be in your body.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot depends, I think, on what the exact chemical they use for the tracer, because there are various kinds. But what they do also is a CT scan at the same time, because the CT scan images the whole rest of the body, whereas the PET, it stands for positron emission tomography. Basically, it only indicates where these extra radiation is coming from.
Very helpful, Tom. Very helpful to understand.
So they always do the two, as far as I know, I think they always do the two together, so that the PET scan identifies where this extra activity, cancerous activity, probably is, and the CAT scan images the rest of the body.
If we can back up just for a second, Tom and Ned, didn't we hear last week or before that the liver cancer they didn't think was the source, but that it had been invaded from elsewhere?
Right.
And that's why the PET scan now.
Yeah. This has been something that they've known for a while, and I'm a little I would have at least wonderments about why they didn't try the PET scan previously, but Yeah, apparently the cancer that they've identified on the liver, which they gave this very generic name to, is not from the liver. They don't even know whether it's infected the liver. It's just laying on it. Tom, you may have some wisdom about that.
Yeah, I that's what I understood too from what he said.
It's
Yeah,
not uncommon for liver cancer to indicate cancer somewhere else other than in the liver.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Really?
That's a fairly
Okay.
common reality.
yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
that
Yeah.
really helps me because they've
I don't
not.
think we're gonna tell George Crook that that's common.
Oh, he already
Not
knows.
His doctors have
Crook.
his doctors have told him that.
Yeah,
He needs exceptional things.
I had a PET scan within the past year after the biopsy showed that I had a recurrence of prostate cancer.
yeah,
Then I went in for a PET scan, and that showed that the cancer, fortunately, was still confined to the prostate as it was 12 years ago, and there was no other indicator of cancer in my body.
That's great.
So that's kind of what you're looking
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
I've always thought, Frank, that you had your prostate removed a long time ago. So you never had it taken out.
No, the surgeon told one of the best surgeons around here in Boston told me that there was enough cancer so that surgically there would be a fair chance that some cells would escape into the body
wow.
during the process of the surgery. So he recommended I have radiology and hormone therapy.
This is uncanny,
It
Frank.
wasn't because I was horny. It was because there was a
Okay. Okay.
medical reason to do
Yeah.
it.
Uncanny because a parallel there, 12 years ago, I had prostate surgery for a different reason
Mhm.
in that all the testing, everything indicated that the surgery as opposed to radiation. I was over at the medical center in San Francisco at
Yeah.
UCSF,
Yeah.
and top-notch surgeon there just basically said that this would work. But I had been in a program for six years prior to that, because I'd been diagnosed shortly after I turned 60, and he said I was a good candidate for what they call, in some places, watchful waiting.
Yeah.
There at UCSF, they call it active surveillance, because every 3 to 6 months they would do some kind of intervention, essentially doing an ultrasound for the most part, and then being pretty aggressive about biopsying. And I went through that as long as literally my body could take it. And in the final stages, after about 6 years of this process and watching very carefully, I had an adverse reaction, which sometimes happens. And I ended up, as my daughter said, nearly dying, Dad. I spent a week in hospital with a really nasty case of E. coli. Fortunately, they could treat it, but part of that insidious disease is that you don't realize you just start feeling sick and your fever shoots up, and then you get a little out of it. And fortunately, I was able to get there. And so, long story short, enough of the active surveillance. It was time to yank the thing out, and I've been doing just great up to this conversation. Makes me just a tad anxious because I have a PET scan scheduled in January, and it's I don't know all the details of it, but it's a specific one for prostate cancer survivors when they're ultra PSA. Sorry, guys, if those of you who don't have it don't know what we're talking about. But my ultra PSA has approached the 0.2. It's still 1.7 0.7 something for the ultra reading, but the docs basically are saying it's getting close enough. I want to be conservative. Let's do they call it a PSMA PET scan. So it
Yeah.
relates to the prostate specific kind of exploration, but that's going to be scheduled at the end of January.
It's
I
kind of
cannot-
interesting because they've only developed that within the last 2 years.
It's really quite.
And the kind that I had was the Axiom, I think, something like that. And that is the previous generation. It's not as accurate as the PSMA one. You know, so you know you're getting the state of the art stuff.
Yeah,
I had that too, Bob, but mine was 1.94, and then it dropped to 1.51, but it was still indicative that the cancer had returned. So
yeah. The caregiver for me, this person I have I've been having video consults with for years, basically said, you know, you could wait another 3-6 months, but you've been doing so well, and the creepy crawlies of the numbers are such that let's be conservative and just go ahead and do this now. It'll give us a little more time. And I went, you know, and if it turns out that it continues creepy crawling, whatever, she said, you're not going to die of prostate cancer. I mean, that was pretty direct. You know, you know, every now and then I know, married to a doctor for 30-something years, they can play God.
Yeah,
there are all kinds of jokes related to that, but I won't go into them just yet. But so she said, and if this is eminently treatable, so that's one of the strange things about prostate cancer, that they can treat it, but when it gets out of control, it can kill you and relatively fast. So.
plus, the older you get, your body works with it because it's a slow moving cancer. And as your metabolism slows down, it kind of takes the potency out of the cancer, if you will.
Right.
So
You know, Bob Jabro, we were talking about Bob Jabro, and I remember when I had my open heart surgery in 2012, I was talking, he had somehow we called each other, and at that point he had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he went through, I guess in his particular case, because I agree with you, Bob, I've heard that basically that's pretty treatable, that prostate cancer generally is, and you'll probably die of something other than that. But in his particular case, and he had one of those kinds where they would treat it in some way and he would get, I guess, a remission or whatever else, and then it would come back, and they'd have to do something more, and it would go back, and eventually they got to the point where there was nothing more that they could do, and I think he died of it.
Yeah.
But that I don't hear of too many people who die of
I've
prostate.
had a few parishioners who did, but it's not common.
Gary,
Well,
Gary,
you know,
would-
I have a little story because my dad died basically of prostate cancer, but it actually was pneumonia as a result of a fall where he broke his hip as a result of osteoporosis that was resulting from the prostate cancer having metastasized to his spine.
Yeah.
Wow.
So technically speaking, he didn't die of prostate cancer, but he sure suffered a heck of a lot in the end for the as a result of it.
Yeah, it's
How
common
old
that it
was he, Tom?
migrates to the bones.
Yeah.
How
It's
old
not
was he?
uncommon, again, that
Yeah.
prostate cancer, if
Yes.
it migrates, it goes to the bones.
Goes to the
Right.
bones.
Yeah.
My dad was 91.
Yeah, my dad died of prostate cancer / bone cancer. And he was 94.
Mhm.
And my mother used to say, she wasn't talking so much about my dad, but in general about the whole death and dying process. You know, you gotta die of something.
Yeah.
Just
Yes, I mean, that, I was just thinking about,
very straight. None of us get out of this life alive. Kind of. We lived in Massachusetts at the time, and she said that's like Massachusetts. It's like two things you can be sure of. You're going to be taxed and you're going to die.
Yeah.
All the rest is up for grabs.
Also, I do need to let you know that I got a text earlier from Norm Supanchek, who is on retreat. They're having a retreat for retired priests up at the House of Prayer.
Oh, how nice is that?
And so he said he may be able to join us. He'll try to join us a little bit later, but for right now, it's the retreat activities. Actually, this is the last day of it. So,
what is the House of Prayer?
well, it's a it's basically a place. It's where the old Immaculate Heart Sisters had their mother house after the Immaculate Heart Sisters split. It's up on Waverly Drive, and it's essentially a retreat house for priests. It has 2 full-time priests, diocesan priests now, staffing it. Jack Stager, my spiritual director, is one of them. His brother died about 5 or 6 years ago of prostate cancer too. A late diagnosed, very aggressive prostate cancer that took him like within 6 months of the diagnosis.
So when we're talking about prostate cancer, we're there is not just one prostate cancer. As I understand it now, cancer's looked at in a very different way than not so long ago. It's again a spectrum disease, and it can consist of a whole bunch of things. And now they're trying to determine what kind of cancer the thing is, and so that they can come up with a good plan to treat it. So Frank, all prostate cancer is not slow moving, is it? I mean,
it generally is. That's why if you see someone who dies of prostate cancer within a short period of time, it's generally that they're younger because their metabolism is so much stronger. Because the older you get, the slower your metabolism, and prostate cancer is very much tied into that. I just had treatment for prostate cancer on the 7th and the 14th of November. And it's a new treatment.
What is the treatment, Frank? What is it?
Again, it's a variation on the theme of the treatment I had before of radiation and hormone therapy. So I had Labor Day weekend, I had a Lupron shot, which is a hormone that brings down testosterone that kind of
that's
works.
what I've had for the last
And then on the 7th and 14th, I went to the hospital and I was under for 2.5 hours or 3 hours on both of those days. And they go in with an instrument and deposit a moderate amount of radiation on the entire prostate, and then a stronger amount of radiation on the lesions. And there's 2 sessions of that.
But Frank, you don't have a prostate,
huh?
But you don't have a prostate, do you?
Yeah, I did. Mine wasn't removed.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
The surgeon told me not to remove it because of the danger of cells escaping. So this is a new, there's been for years, there've been something called seeds. They put radiation seeds in. This isn't seeds. This is an actual kind of instrument that he goes in with, a radiologist, and treats it in that fashion. So there's some little, discomfort in that for a week or 2 after it happens. But, at this point, I'm pretty well back to normal.
Which hospital were you at, Frank?
Brigham and Women's in Boston.
Yeah, top notch.
So let me ask a question. You're talking about, Ned, you brought it up, and then it's been about the cancer is just not one thing. has many masks. It has many faces.
Very much.
Well, let me just shift it to COVID for a minute because I need some insight from you guys. And that's what my wife had really bad COVID, and she has been COVID free for most of a month now, but she has some after effects that just linger. Well, her doctor, and one of them is shortness of breath, fatigue, just feeling like shit most of the time.
Mhm.
And so the doctor did a blood test and found that the blood test showed some anomalies. And so we went to the hospital the other night. She had a CAT scan, CT scan of her lungs, and they found blood clots in her right lung, which apparently is not unusual as a COVID after effect. And
Oh,
here's my question. And so the doctor has put her on a blood thinner called Xarelto. Do
Mhm.
any of you guys, do any of you take a blood thinner? I was wondering about you, Frank Daly, with your
Yeah.
card.
I take a baby aspirin once a day and a blood thinner called Prasugrel, Prasugrel, which is actually a little stronger than the standard blood thinner called Plavix.
Yeah, okay. Now, and so what are the effects on your body of taking the blood thinner? I mean, do you know that you're even taking it?
Yeah. Let me see.
I was gonna
See
say,
my
show me-
arm?
Bruising? Okay.
Show some bruising.
There it is.
Yeah.
See that?
Mhm.
Yep.
That just bump up against the edge of a door.
Wow.
So, internally, I'm not sure. Sometimes I feel a little weak, but that has to do also with I got blocked arteries. But and the blood thinner is to make the blood thin, so it'll go through the blocked arteries. So, yeah, a lot of it depends how strong it is. That mine is very strong, so I just bump up against the door, and that happens on my skin, on my arms, not usually on the rest of my body.
And so last week Frank, you had some tests done on the artery in your neck. And so
Yeah.
what do you know
I'll
from
be
that?
right back. I'll be right back.
I met with
Okay.
my doctor yesterday, with a vascular surgeon, and my cardiologist and he are at some odds. Certainly there's two arteries in the back of the neck, and one of them is completely blocked. But he didn't seem that concerned about that. It's my
No,
carotid
which one,
artery.
which he are you talking about? Who wasn't
The
concerned?
vascular surgeon.
Okay.
He's more concerned about my carotid arteries, the two in my neck.
Mhm.
The carotid artery they branch, go to the brain and to the face. And so there's significant blockage there. My cardiologist doesn't think it's as bad. So the two of them are going to get together. There are solutions. Surgery I've heard it described as risky. He said there's 1% risk in it. So that kind of thing. So I'm waiting for them to see whether or not, given my age, my health, and the particular element of blockage, surgical. It's a fairly simple surgery, just opening, cleaning it out, sewing it back up. It's an hour and a half. You might be able to go home, but more than likely you have to stay in the hospital overnight. So it's that kind of thing,
But you're referencing the carotid artery. What about the
Yeah.
one in the back of the head?
Well, it's in the neck. He didn't say anything about. He wasn't interested. And apparently the one is sufficient.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I know a lot of people, Tim, who have what's called, I think they call it long COVID.
Yeah.
And those symptoms, in fact, I think it's Brigham Women's Hospital in Boston, where I go, has a study now that they're doing on with patients who are experiencing long COVID. And what you described your wife is experiencing is exactly what people are complaining about in terms of long COVID.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm
Are
still
you off the
learning.
health kick yet?
I feel like we've been to
Yeah,
medicine 101 this morning.
Yeah, right.
Well, we have, it sort of dawned on me that it used to be that when a few guys would get together to talk, one of the things that we would sort of mention and then dismiss is how much women like to talk about their operations.
You know,
We're doing the same thing.
I was thinking the same thing. It's interesting. If we had been having Zoom meetings a number of years ago, we'd be talking about our bishop or our parishes or whatever.
Yeah,
And we've all lived long enough that this is the agenda.
It is
Part of
almost,
the
the
agenda.
agenda.
yeah, almost inevitably, conversations among groups like this begin with an organ recital.
Exactly. And I've been reading that book, Bob Bonat. That fellow Scott Dedish, the priest who wrote that book. It's called From Servant to Hero to Mystic. From Hero to Servant to
Yeah.
Mystic. And he's talking about the stages. It seems to me that there are these what they call those things, those archetypes, as a way of describing the spiritual life as the priest progresses in his ministry. And I'm reading it now. I'm just in the first chapter about the hero part, and I'm thinking, as I read it, I'm reflecting on what it was like, my experience, what it was like, as I was in my earliest years as priesthood, and now. So it's not totally relevant to me at this moment for the way he's writing it, but it reminds me of what it was like, and I say, oh yeah, I remember this, or I remember how this occurred, or whatever else. And I'm thinking that here we are now at this stage of our lives, all of us now in our 80s. I mean, I don't know, are we all in our 80s? I think.
Yeah,
So,
We are now.
Yeah.
Bob
Yeah,
Bonat is
Nick.
not. Is
Bob Bonat is not 80?
I don't know.
I'm 81.
Oh, you're older than I am. Oh,
I think I was the last one
Oh,
to become
Yeah.
80 on the day before Thanksgiving. And then Ned
Yes,
was
you
2
were.
days ahead of me. So
Yeah.
so
Right.
our agenda is, we're still growing in our spiritual lives, still dealing, with life. But this is the agenda now. It's interesting.
Mhm.
And by the way, I just want you to know I finally tested negative
Good.
on Wednesday. And as I said, I've been feeling great the last few days, and now I feel free,
Good.
out of
Bravo.
COVID prison.
That's great to hear.
Validation stamp. That's good.
We have a little window down in the corner. There's
There's
Norm.
Hey, Norm.
Hello, how are you? Hey,
Hi,
Ned.
Norm. Hi, Norm.
Is that a halo I see at the back?
Hello,
of your
John.
Hey,
How
Norm,
is the
how was your
retreat going, Norm?
Yeah.
It's going very well. It's been a good retreat. The guy shows, each night he shows a video, but the one last night was on the Pope. And I have never, ever heard such wisdom come from somebody. He was just, the wisdom that came out of him was amazing. And he tied it into world events that was going on. Yeah, Pope Francis.
Is that a man of his word?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is amazing, isn't it?
yeah.
How could we watch that?
I don't know.
Tom, can
probably
you
on
get that?
YouTube.
Well, I may be able to.
I
We
think
looked
it's
at
on
columns
YouTube,
or-
Tim.
Making it available to us.
I think it's probably at least on Amazon Prime.
His word. All right.
I don't know. I'll have to.
How long is it, Norm?
It's very long.
Oh.
It was very long. It was about 2 hours, but it was
Oh,
it
good.
was
I was saying if it was shorter, we could have it as part of our agenda one day. So.
we could have parts of it as part of our agenda, but it was just wow. It was wow. It was Scorsese did the filming and stuff, and he just did an amazing job.
It's on YouTube.
Thank you,
Or just
Frank.
Google a
Frank.
man of his word. It's 1 hour and 55 minutes. Pope Francis, a man of his word. Well,
Yes.
that's, yeah, so.
Okay, I have if I can ask a question that has nothing to do with our health or and stuff like that.
Okay.
And so last week we had this animated conversation about death and all of that. And Bob Benoit made this comment about he was reading something from this Jesuit scholar, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, that, was Jesus surprised at his resurrection? Well, Fred took that in his commentaries to us that he makes within by the end of the day. And so Fred started out, as you might remember, by talking about, different guys that he knew that became bishops and things like that, and buddies of you guys from the North American College. And then he got into trying to deal with the point that Bob had made. And he started talking in his essay on Friday about the dual nature of Jesus. And man, did it just go right over my head. And so I thought, I'm looking here at this screen with three guys at least, who spent a lot of time studying theology. And he made mention, and I hope you all read Fred's thing, because I tell you, for an old man, he can put together an essay like nobody's business. He was talking about this controversy in the early church about the human and the divine nature of Jesus being in one person. Okay, and that's so, growing up and pretty much as a lay Catholic, okay, I got all of that. And then he did describe the difference of opinions in the early church about what did that mean? And then he talked about this council of, is it Chaldea?
Chalcedon.
Chalcedon.
Stephen.
See,
Chalcedon.
Okay.
I know as much about how
Wherever
to-
they are, it's now present day Kadikoy, and it's across the straits from downtown Istanbul.
Oh, okay. Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
okay,
there's
okay.
actually one of the gifts I used to give to my wife with relative success, because she usually liked it, is jewelry. And there is actually a jewelry called chalcedony.
Yeah.
Sorry
I know
about
as-
that.
Okay.
Anyway, Chalcedon. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And there were terms that he used that I didn't even know what they meant. So I had to go to my Wikipedia and look them up. So did the issue of the balance between Jesus's human personality and his divine personality, did that get resolved in Chalcedon? Or is it something that has been taken up later years, Middle Ages, by other theologians? Because not that I can ever understand the idea, the interplay between Jesus as God and Jesus as man, but we binge watched The Chosen season 2, and season 3 starts, and I loved it. I mean, I just loved it. But the thing that series brought to Sandra and me was, well, if Jesus was all-knowing, had the beatific vision, then, for example, why did he invite Judas to join the group? Why did he give Judas at the Last Supper? And it's just, and I suspect what I'm asking you guys is for an answer that I can try to understand, because the terminology is so divorced from my career and all that. What did that Council of Chalcedon arrive at? Or was there no definitive conclusion?
Can I say something for openers and then I'll shut up? Ha.
Please do.
But you know,
Please
the
shut up.
openers
Please.
is-
Anybody can say.
the openers is we want answers to what is essentially a mystery.
Absolutely.
The best thing that those early councils did, and Chalcedon was the one that, if I remember rightly, pretty much developed and refined Nicaea, but just exactly how, the main thing those councils did was to say that certain ways of explaining the person of Jesus in relation to God and the Trinity and so on, that certain ways of explaining it don't work. But they never really, came up with explanations. They came up with words like hypostatic union and consubstantial and all of that kind of stuff that at least weren't wrong, but they don't say a heck of a lot. They don't say much that the rest of us, normal human beings, can really understand.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
At the bottom of it, we've got a mystery that we need to contemplate and to explore, but we're never going to get answers for.
I wanted to say that I have as much understanding of what all that is about as I do about how to pronounce Chalcedon or Chalcedon.
Right.
It's all we can say is that the way they say it is there's two natures but one person, and I don't know how that all interplays, and I think what Bob you were saying about we both heard the same thing about, was Jesus surprised at his resurrection is a way of emphasizing the humanity of Christ. But people have emphasized the divinity of Christ that leads to what you say, how would he have chosen Judas? If he knew all this stuff, then that would mean he was just pretending to be a human being.
Right. Tim and anyone else who's been watching The Chosen, fairly amazing. The humanity of Jesus and his mother and the immediate followers, not to mention women were included, which is much more likely. I would like to have seen more children as part of it too, because that was probably more likely. But the wrestling with the issue of Jesus wrestling with his humanity is the piece that comes through for me. I know I'm watching for it and looking for it, so that helps set it up for me. Yeah. But when that happens in particular scenes, I find that very, very helpful. And then ultimately, it brings to the fore, I agree with what has been said so far. It is so far beyond me to understand what is it really all about. And that ultimately, I think, kind of wrestling with the questions of how can this be? Is the important issue for me, and I leave it to the Fred Lawrences of this world to helpfully articulate the story, his story of where we got it and where we are today. But that ultimately, it's just a kind of a fun and crazy making and love making and mystery and holy making mystery. And
it truly is. And so look, I'm looking at it as both a form of entertainment as well as maybe some insights. But to me, okay, and maybe you're going to say, no, I've got the wrong take. But to me, the more that I can believe that Jesus, in his human nature, he had to have been scared shitless. He had to have been worried. He had to have he had to have the human, he had to have worried about his mother. He had to have worried about, am I pulling the right kind of crew together to go out after me? And to me, the sacrifice on the cross and what he put himself through, the more that I can try to understand that, if I thought that he knew that, okay, I'm going to suffer like crazy for several days here, I'm going to be tortured, but guess what? On Sunday morning, I'm going to rise glorious and it's all going to be over and all that. That kind of diminishes, maybe this is heretical, but it kind of diminishes for me the sacrifice on the cross.
It diminishes it immensely because I'm convinced that there was a heresy that they dealt with this beautifully odd name of monothelitism. Whether or not Christ, there was one will or two wills. Did the human Christ operate with the will of God? Or was his human will distinct from God's will? And the heresy said there was only one will. The Orthodox doctrine is that there were two wills. What that means is that accepting that suffering, that sacrificial suffering and death, was no easier nor any more automatic with him than it would be for any of us. Yeah. It wasn't just an automatic thing. He had to have faith in God the Father.
Some work tailing off what you're saying, Tom. The contemporary, thank you, Jung and Jung's followers for the whole notion of paradox. It's one of the most helpful concepts for me to not to understand, but to live with and be more comfortable. The answer to the question you just posed about the wills, the answer for me is yes. And with a giggle, it's both. And I don't understand how that works, but it's a little bit, the notion of paradox.
Yeah.
Both are true at the same time, both are false at the same time, and the reality is somewhere between both of them. And if you think you can figure that out, then you're God.
And it's sort of like a wormhole that invites us in to explore something deeper.
I like that image too. Thank you.
Well, or the precision of ambiguity.
Okay, can clarify that, Frank.
Well, that's
very good. Yeah.
I mean, there are things that are beyond us, and we can approach. But the famous saying, "O admirabile commercium," a wondrous exchange, which is, in fact, that we as human beings Christ went through the same things that we suffered, and we also have a spark of his divinity in us.
Right.
He had our humanity completely in him, but we're not devoid of a touch of his divinity in us. And so, while we're not God, we're called to something higher and more than we are. And so,
a little less than the angels. Sorry.
Yeah, right. Psalm 8. Yeah. And so for us to kind of wonder whether or not, he was play acting is, delegitimizes it.
Sure.
Right off the bat. And I go back again to Bob, our classmate, the late John Meyer, who wrote volumes and volumes on the historical Jesus.
Yeah.
But never crossed over from the crucifixion to the resurrection. His books end with the crucifixion. And I take that to mean that a historical argument to some extent with the resurrection is somewhat useless because we passed into a whole other area of knowledge, namely faith. And so I think, for example, what happens is we get into these debates about Jesus's, and we, you know, I mean, I thought that was pretty much settled after Nicaea. You know, that Jesus had, you know, two natures. But then we get into this whole thing about trying to figure this out, and the danger is that we take an easy path by saying it's a mystery, but the other danger is we take a kind of a positivistic tack and say, well, we can solve this. I'm not sure if I'm bringing things together, but anyway, that's
okay. But so let me take that last comment. So then, why then, if you can't solve it, then why does there continue then to be vigorous debate about it over the centuries?
because we have no other alternative but to seek deeper understanding, which doesn't mean that we get to the point of full understanding.
It's a little bit like, for using another metaphor, it's what astrophysicists are doing these days in an expanding universe. They keep asking the important questions because the universe continues to expand. And in that process, they're making almost daily discoveries that are causing them to scratch their heads and to throw out old theories that they had. And I find it fascinating that many of them won't openly talk about the whole notion of God or acknowledge the existence. And some might simply say, oh, bunch of atheists, those guys. And I remember Tom Fox saying once in a conference, a class I was taking with him, just about physicists, especially theoretical physicists, being closet mystics. And I went, oh boy, yeah, because the mysteries, the scratch your head or call it anything you want, questions, the important questions keep arising and they don't have answers for them. And the serious ones, all they can do is sort of grin and keep on asking the hard questions. And
that's a great comparison.
No, there's no accident, you know, that some of the best conversations that have gone on in the past have been between a serious conversation, often very private, between a theologian, someone who's taken the study of theology seriously, and a physicist, and as you know, they set up conversation rules beforehand, but they mostly listen to one another and don't try to correct one another. Just listen. It's a little bit like how the universe expands.
Well, it's like Teilhard said that basically his faith and his paleontology converged and took him to the same place.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with one of my sons a couple of years ago, and we were talking about the agnosticism, at least, if not downright atheism of so many scientists. Since then, I've found that there are a huge number of Catholic, Christian scientists out there that have done some amazing things. But we kind of focused on two things. One was biology and the other was physics. And we tentatively concluded that there are many, many more agnostics and atheists among biologists than among physicists.
I remember you saying that before, Ned.
Yeah, I remember Mark saying, Dad, I don't understand why biologists, gazing at at least just the body, a human body, can, you know, honestly in their hearts say that that it's just a happenstance that took so many years to happen. And he said, but the physicists, Dad, wow, and then they went off on chaos theory and string theory, and oh my gosh, and he says, and they all, well, it's my hope that all really understand again the paradoxes out there in science, and come to the conclusion that where are you? Help me find you.
That's interesting. I watched an interview this week. It's been rainy and crappy, and I watched an interview with one of the lead scientists on the Hubble Observatory. And the question, kind of the central question was, is the universe expanding or is it contracting? How fast is it expanding, or how fast, if it's contracting, is that happening? And he said, and this is the point that I think, Tom, you made, and that Bob C., you made, is he said we continue to ask the questions, although we hadn't yet found the answers to what is the nature of the universe. But he said, now we know. He said, I think we know that the universe is expanding, and it's expanding at an accelerating rate. And he said, now let me tell you why that was an earth-shaking discovery. Because he said, up until the time that we arrived at that, all of our physics principles argued that if the universe was contracting, that there would be an end time. That there would be a time, and you said you might even put a time horizon on it, or if it was contracting, it would implode on itself and just be over. And he said, there are a lot of spiritual implications of that, a lot of religious implications to think that there was a time where it would all come to an end. But he said now, and he said, I think that the science is pretty consistent that the universe is expanding. It's expanding at a more rapid rate all the time. He said, it's really kind of upset a lot of the theories that we'd had before. So it's kind of like the question about Jesus's nature. So I guess my question to Frank was kind of stupid. Is why do people continue to debate it? We're not going to have the answer to Jesus's nature, are we? There's not going to be some Hubble telescope that's going to appear and say, here's how you understand the interplay between his divine and human nature. It ain't going to happen. But it's kind of fun to ask the questions. Maybe
I think it's more than fun. I think it's that we can't be ourselves and not wonder and not seek and not try to find a way to deepen our knowledge of this and our understanding of something that's so central to our lives.
That's a pretty good definition of a human being, a wandering critter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The way I mostly, what I find most helpful, I just think of Jesus as a sacrament of God. And that, I used to ask kids in class that if God were to become a mountain, what would God be like? If God were to become a mountain, or if God were to become a river, what would God be like? Or if God were to become, that's how I understand, for me, that Jesus, the divine and human natures come in for me in thinking of Jesus as a sacrament.
Did we just have a divine intervention when your voice and picture froze?
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Oh,
you were asking.
Was I speaking heresy at that point?
You were asking.
No.
Might be, but you froze for a few seconds there, Gary.
It was a very profound question, and all of a sudden, whoo.
Oh, well, what I was saying was I used to ask yes, I wonder why you weren't astounded. No, I used to ask the question of the 8th graders in the school, if God were to become a mountain, what would God be like? How would you envision God if God became a mountain? Or how would you envision if God became a river? How would you envision that? Or how, if God became a valley, how would you envision what that valley would be like? Well, if God were to become a human being, what would God be like? And that's to me, that's Jesus, as the sacrament of God.
Right. It reminds me of that song a few years ago. My daughter used to walk around humming and singing it because she wasn't particularly into churchy stuff. What if God, I won't even try to do the melody, but the words were, what if God were one of us?
Yeah.
And because she'd be walking around and look at me and I'd go, he, she, they are, is. And she'd look at me back. Yes.
So
God is.
Gary, you've been in the news.
Oh,
Has
yeah.
been in the news this week.
Yeah.
What about?
Didn't the LA Archdiocese years ago publish the name of every priest that had been accused of pedophilia, sexual abuse, and all that, and it was made public? Did Santa Rosa Diocese do that?
Yes.
You must have known a lot of those guys.
Yes. Yeah.
Boston did it, and I know a lot of the guys there too. I mean, it happened. Most dioceses did it.
Mm-hmm.
So Gary, when you read that, and maybe this is too personal, is it like a kick in the gut when you read the names of buddies of yours who?
It's been a long time now. We've been living with this for years, and we've gone through worse. I mean, not worse than that. We've also gone. I can't. I'll have to call him later on. But we've been dealing with this for a long time. So this is more. It's interesting to me that after all this time, this has happened again, because this ever end. My phone is ringing.
Mhm.
It goes on. It just goes on. But we've had, that one. What happened? We've dealt with this for so many years now. And then, of course, as a priest, you're always worried that you'll be accused yourself. I mean, we're all vulnerable, even now, and there's no way to defend yourself. I mean, everybody's going to say this did not happen, and how do you prove it? You can't prove it. So, but yes, it was awful. And then I thought it was all done. I mean, the diocese has paid out $33 million. Our little diocese has paid out $33 million. And then 3 years ago, the California state legislature, I'm sure at the prodding of lawyers, eliminated for 3 years the statute of limitations on these, and they included schools and hospitals and other kinds of things as well. And at that time, and after all this time, our bishop, I don't agree with him ecclesiologically or theologically, but he is scrupulous in terms of all of this, and he went through every single thing and came up with all kinds of names. And I knew a lot of them, but there were a lot I didn't know. There were guys who came in for 6 months and then they were gone. I mean, I didn't know, and some of them were brothers and some were, parts of religious orders and stuff. But they had at that time about 10 cases that they knew of that they were still trying to finalize. That was sort of like that 3 years ago. As far as I know, a few weeks ago, there are 130 with more to come.
Gosh.
And what happened was one of the vicars general of San Francisco, that's going through the same thing in San Francisco. I was talking to him because they're dealing with the same thing. I guess every diocese is, Tom, I suppose.
Yeah, there was something in the LA Times just this morning. I forget his name, but a Servite from Orange County.
Yeah.
Apparently was an egregious abuser, and it just now came to the surface. And I think he's been long dead. And
There was
all of this happened in the 70s and 80s.
some of these cases that they've come up with go back to the 1960s.
Yeah.
When our diocese was just formed. So, and what one of these guys, Pat Summerhays, is the San Francisco has 2 vicar generals. And one of them, Pat Summerhays, we were talking about this about a month or 2 ago. And he said, what has happened, this is how he described it to me, is that the lawyers got a hold of attendance records at, like the CYO camp or ours, Camp St. Michael or Hannah Center, and were phoning all the people who would attend to theirs, and well, they're fishing. I don't know how else to say it. They're drumming up business. How after all of this time do you get 130 more cases of people, I mean, who had all this time before? So I don't know. All of us sit back and we just figure at this point, it's not really about healing as much as it is about somebody making money. But our diocese doesn't have anything. And see, all the parishes are now incorporated themselves. So the diocese itself is what declares the bankruptcy. They don't know how else to function. And at the same time, according to the bishop, you're in a bankruptcy. I don't know how all this stuff works, but you parcel out as best you can to all these victims the resources that you have, and still are able to function. I don't know how it works.
They just went bankrupt, right? Your diocese?
Yeah.
I just read about that.
I think in March, they're going to declare bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have until the 31st of December is when that window closes, and when there are ads in the television all the time now from.
Really? Are you kidding
Jeff
me?
Anderson. Oh gosh, what you see is on TV. I was watching, football games, and in the middle there's a QR code comes on, and you hear the voices of children, and it said, if you've been a victim of clergy abuse, you have until December the 31st to take legal action. And then they have, the Jeff Anderson's information and that kind of stuff. Oh, it's in the papers all the time. Pictures of priests. Yeah. Pictures of priests.
It's just a reliving.
And the
Seems to
thing
me
is,
that,
the thing is that I mean, like in our diocese, and I think every diocese, they have protocols in place. I mean, everybody's taking safe environment training. You've got fingerprinting, safe environment training, and they put into place, all these procedures for keeping children safe, and there are protocols for priests. And of course, like I say, if you get accused, you're pretty much done. It's not. It's one strike and you're out, and there's no apparently any. If somebody did make a mistake and maybe his whole life is entirely changed, that's out the window. It doesn't make any difference. So I don't know what more they can do. So this and being transparent, the bishop, and like you say, Los Angeles, I'm sure Boston did the same thing. The bishops have been but this is what's happened. This is what we did, and that sort of stuff. But there were things that happened years ago when the church the authorities didn't really understand what they were dealing with. They were trying to deal with it as best they can. But it's all under I'm just glad I'm no longer active. I mean, I'm glad I'm retired, because although I'll tell you what, Sunday morning I went to Mass, tons of people. I mean, for us, it's not like in the Midwest or the East Coast, but for our little diocese, it seems like they're all there and they just keep on plugging away, I mean, and they understand what bankruptcy is. I mean, I've only had my priest friend Dan Welton says, what really bothers me is that not one person has called me up to say, Father, how are you doing through all of this?
Yeah.
They do, but they understand bankruptcy, and I think it doesn't seem to have affected the attendance as far as I could see, based on one Mass I went to last Sunday, which came just after the headlines in our paper.
So when
You're never going to heal people. If the healing is gone, that's out the window. That's long past.
Why do you say that?
Because there's no way to heal this. I mean, the people who have been victimized, unfortunately, the only way, I remember a woman who had been abused saying to me, the only way that you can be healed is when the abuser and you have a conference, I mean, a meeting, and there's an apology and a kind of a mutual whatever.
Yes, sir.
That's how she said it. And usually by this time the lawyers get involved. You can't do anything. But I mean, it's so many years now. Most of these priests are dead.
Yeah.
That the cases have come up now. That's why I say what I say healing is for them, for the victims. It's I guess the only thing that will help them would be some sort of financial compensation. And how much is going to go to them and how much is going to go to the lawyers, I don't know.
Yeah.
But Tim, you asked the question originally about the kick in the gut. Imagine, like in our experience in Boston, you're going to a theater to watch an Academy Award film.
Yes.
Yeah.
Spotlight.
And you sit down and watch the film, and when it's finished, you're kind of drained.
Yeah.
But then the cherry on the cake is the scroll.
Yes.
The names of people you were in the seminary with.
Yeah.
The scrolling down on the screen as identified abusers.
Ouch.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
All of them convicted?
I
Or just
think
accused?
so. I think convicted. I think. I think that's a good point, but I think at least some of the names that I saw were, whether they were convicted in court legally, they were adjudged to be in fact abusers by the diocese.
Well,
Gary,
legally, there's a distinction there between whether you are convicted of a crime or
Right.
whether you are you lose a lawsuit.
Right.
You know, and the difference between a civil suit and a criminal trial is very significant. And I would say most of them have not been convicted. Well, the statute of limitations is different too. This lifting of the statute of limitations is on the filing of a lawsuit, not on the not on whether they can be prosecuted or not.
But there's a further distinction. There's a further distinction as to whether or not the diocese has substantiated the claim or not. Because once the claim is made, you're off the job, so to speak.
Yeah.
And there's a further distinction in as much as when you see those names, given your experience, you could say, yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Gary, if I may go back to Gary's remark about the only solution is to have the victim confronted directly with the abuser.
That's what this woman told me.
And I 100% disagree with that, as let's call me an evangelist, if you will. And that is, I might just go in counseling with a victim to talk about how Jesus suffered and how we as believers are called to be with Jesus. I'm seeing three things going on today. One is theological, one is logical, but the third is evangelizing. What is it we do with our homilies, our Bible studies, our one-on-one counseling? And we're not going to take the Council of Nicaea or Chalcedon in that. We're going to take lessons from the scriptures. Was it somebody in our group who just went back to reading, maybe it's a personal friend, who just went back to reading the New Testament with the idea of how does this touch my interaction with family, friends, co-workers and all.
It
Just
must have been a friend. Must have been a
my
friend.
take. Yeah,
Well, it was in George Ferrick's response to Fred, I think, in which he said, he asked Fred when he was going to Rome, what should we read or something like that?
Yeah.
And Fred said to him, read the New Testament. Yeah.
there it is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think we've been on 3 levels. I just want to throw in a 4th level. Did anybody else see the Rams come from behind last night?
Yes.
They were down 16-3 going into the last minutes of the game. And they won 17-16. It
Did
was
Baker
amazing.
Mayfield play? Did Mayfield play?
Yes, he did, and he
And
was
he was a
good.
star.
Yeah.
It was
So
the passing
Chalcedon's
game.
not the only mystery rather. I want to go back for a minute to what Bob C. was talking about with physicists. I think similar things happen with some physicians. That, for example, say you're a physician, you have someone on the table, and how you manage that, or, how can you avoid understanding that there's something of a crossover here between solving the physical problem and pulling you in to the kind of mystery of the human being.
Yep.
So, for example, after I had my open heart surgery, my surgeon, his name was Sari Aranki, he was a Palestinian Christian. And he came to me the day afterwards, and I still can't figure this out. And he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, Father, how many hearts do priests touch? And I, thinking he meant one thing, said, well, we touch a lot of hearts. We're with people when they're very sad. We're with them with very joyous moments. They admit us to confidences that they wouldn't admit anyone else to. We touch a lot of hearts. And he tapped me on the shoulder and said, I touched yours. And I still can't figure out whether he was one-upping me or whether he was telling me that we were kind of on the same plane.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to think the second.
Me too.
And if it was both, so what?
Yeah.
Did anybody watch the news hour, the PBS news hour last night?
No.
No.
Yes.
I watched it.
I did.
Well, to me, one of the most poignant scenes on there was, and I think it was only 2 or 3 seconds, nothing more, in Ukraine, where a doctor was performing open heart surgery on an infant
With a headlamp.
with a headlamp, and people were also illuminating it with their cell phone flashlights.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, that was very, very poignant to me.
Yeah, that would make an absolutely fabulous Christmas card in some ways, as
Yeah.
in talk about light, here is the light come into the world. We're doing what we can because the light came into the world.
Uh-huh.
And what a homily would come from that for a parish.
Yeah, it was a beautiful scene.
I think it's visually sacred.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. I have it taped. I always have it, the PBS News Hour recorded. I'll go back. I looked at it last night, but I must have been distracted at that point.
Yeah, you can get it on YouTube also.
You were drinking your Negroni. You had your Negroni.
Oh, I certainly was. That goes without saying.
Hey guys, forgive me for interrupting. I've just been reminded that I need to go. The doctor, got to go see a doctor.
Okay.
So thank
Geez.
you. Talk
Good
to you
luck.
guys soon.
Thanks, Ned.
I'm gonna get back to you, Tim.
It's been a while.
Thanks for keeping us
We're all
updated on
retired.
George too. Ned.
Yeah.
Retired so we can go
Okay,
to
bye,
doctors.
Ned.
That's,
Okay, God bless.
God bless.
Bye, Ned.
Gary, I'm
wonder how-
interested.
Have a good week.
You too.
Yeah, I'm interested, Gary, in your diocese is going bankrupt, and you said something about each parish is
Oh,
going
Yeah.
to have its own financial status. Could you comment
Yeah.
further on that?
Yeah, I think one of the problems with all of this, and Tom, it goes back to the James Francis Cardinal McIntyre, when they came up with the idea of the corporation soul, that all the parishes were part of one corporation. And according to my friend, and Frank might know this better. I don't know. Frank seems to know a lot about all kinds of things church-wise. Frank, are you aware? Are you much of a canon lawyer also, besides being a theologian? Because
is this accusatory or
Is this
my priest, Dan Welton was our vicar general for many years. Very close friend of mine, lives in our parish here. He's retired now, but he told me a long time ago that the idea of the corporation soul, where all the parishes, everything is part of one juridic entity, is contrary to canon law. And so when all these abuse things started, the Roman Catholic Church was a great target because it had a huge resources. I mean, you couldn't accuse the First Baptist Church of Orchard Street, because those are all separate little entities. But the corporation soul is huge, but it's contrary to canon law. So what dioceses have done, and what ours did a number of years ago, was to make each parish its own corporation soul. So each parish, and that's more according to canon law. I think Stockton, we have done that. And of course, one of the comments when the paper came out, well, they did that to shield themselves from these lawsuits. Well, yes, that would be one of the reasons, so what I meant when I said that, Bob, is that each parish now is a corporation soul. The diocese is a separate corporation soul. And then the parishes, I guess, have a contractual relationship for services and things like that with the diocese. I don't know how it all works.
I think one thing that needs to be kept in mind is that each state has its own corporation laws.
Oh, okay.
So, it probably has a lot of variations in various states.
But the movement to corporation soul was, as I understand it, a reaction to trusteeism, which was a kind of a practice that arose and dovetailed with the criticism of the church in the United States as being Americanist. And that therefore so it's probably some kind of an exception allowed, if it's not, explicit in canon law, for Americans, in order to avoid some of the early 20th century perceived excesses of trusteeism that then they came up to. I'm very interested in that. That's interesting. I thought that corporation soul was essentially the standard by which American dioceses were organized, and had not heard before of a diocese that was not corporation soul. But that may be just the lack of my knowledge.
I think there were a few in the United States that were not corporation souls. I think the majority were.
The other thing that corporation soul, one of the disadvantages, alluding to one thing you said, Gary, is that during the pandemic, the US government had a program called PPE, which gave loaned money to nonprofit organizations and forgave the loans if you could show at the end of the time that you'd use the money to maintain staff levels. And the Catholic Church in the United States, there was an article, I think, in the New York Times, got really criticized for something like taking 1.8 billion in PPE, which would not have been an article had the individual parishes been corporation soul.
And Gary, didn't you just say though, if I heard you correctly, that the individual parishes, at least in the Santa Rosa diocese, also are corporation souls?
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
Did you say that the individual parishes in the Santa
Yes.
Rosa diocese
Yeah,
are corporation souls?
each individual,
And
yeah,
And the diocese is a corporation soul.
yes.
right.
Is that
I mean,
true?
it's in itself.
Is that true for all dioceses, most
I don't think
dioceses?
so.
That you have parishes that function as corporation souls? This is
Not
new,
in North Carolina.
No,
news
Not
to
in
me.
Massachusetts.
I don't
no,
think-
no, it's been adopted by a number of dioceses, and ours is one of them.
Okay.
I think Stockton did that, and
Did
I
it
know
hold-
we have done that.
I'll bet the big point is the difference from state to state on how the legal system looks at corporate soul.
Right.
So Bob, if, for instance, if a parish writes a check in this archdiocese, the check says the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Boston Corporation Sole,
Yeah.
St. Anne's Parish.
Really? Hmm.
And the pastor has a legal document, a power of attorney to act on behalf of the corporation sole in Massachusetts.
Got it. So what you're saying is that the individual parishes, though, are not corporation souls.
No, they're not.
Not in,
Getting too complicated for me. This is where
Yeah, we're all,
if I wanted to pursue it, I'd say, where are our lawyers here right now? But I don't particularly want to pursue it.
that's what Bob Bernard asked about. So,
Well, it seems to me that the diocese as a corporation sole, it gets all the money, it has all the control of all the money.
yeah,
Mhm.
And I think that, the bishops, whoever the bishop is at the place, is free in a certain sense to use the money that is coming out of a specific community, however he chooses to do it. And I think that it seems to me, you were saying it's canon law, who was saying canon law? The parish is supposed to be the entity
right.
Mhm.
that receives the donations from the people, and it's money that they're responsible for.
Mhm.
That, to my mind, of course, that opens it up to a huge amount of what would you call it? There can be some nasty financial things going on in
Right.
every parish with that, because the diocese, in a certain sense, wouldn't have control. And clergy are not beyond it. I mean, there's been a number of stories in Chicago and Cincinnati, in my own diocese, a couple of the priests have gone because I think we're corporation sole. But what is going to be better for the future?
I don't know, but this is the best. I'm just telling you as best as I understand it. And believe me, I am not any kind of a lawyer of any kind, civil or canonical. So, and I don't understand most of that.
well, the reason I brought it up is it had to be sad for you that this issue just doesn't go away. That it becomes
No.
it becomes front page. It becomes it's like the attorneys down here in the South. They say, "Were you in a wreck? Call me." Where did you get a traffic? And so now, it's like, well, were you abused, or do you think you were abused, or do you think maybe someone who was abused? I mean, it's just sad because you just simply cannot put an end to the chapter, and that is the sad part, I think. Yeah.
By the way, my internet connection is faulty. So once in a while, everybody freezes up. And then sometimes I have to start all over again to get it back to normal. So
You'll have to watch the whole tape next week in order to see.
well, no, it'll show that. Yeah.
Well, in addition to
Put
the
it on
fact
fast
that
forward, though.
in addition to the fact that it's sad, we have to realize that we don't have standing to object.
No.
Because we're Catholic priests and our brothers abused children. that makes any position, for example, the notion that we're criticizing Anderson and Mitchell Garabedian here in Boston, there's a lot of legitimacy to elements of what they're doing that we can criticize. We don't have any standing to do it. We're at the table without a sword. And that, I think, makes the whole thing even more difficult. You know, people are going to say, if you say anything defensive about this situation, people are going to disregard you.
Yes.
And so it's, in addition to everything else, it's kind of humbling, and actually argues for the most raw kind of honesty that we can summon up when we're asked about this.
You know, Johnny, you had made a comment about dealing the accuser with the accused. And so my dearest friend here in town, who's kind of head of our Cursillo group, was abused over the course of 3 years. He was up in Cleveland area in Ohio. And so he was an altar boy. And in fact, both of his brothers were abused by a loving pastor that everyone just loved. And there were about a dozen guys that talked about it. They were all in Boy Scouts, and they all talked about what Father Joe, was doing, and they wish he didn't do it. And so when it all came out, when they grew up and it all came out, they collectively, these, I think it's 13 kids. And so now they were young adults. They all collectively decided to write a letter forgiving the priest, and they all signed it. And they felt, these guys, and Brian was kind of the spirit, they decided that they could not move on. They could not move on from the years of the, I'm using the word abuse, but they couldn't move on from the events until they forgave. And the priest went to jail, for a long time. But an insight that I got was that, and I want to say this properly, is that most of the guys enjoyed it. And that was the irony of the abuse, is they enjoyed the sexual part of it. And so so as they grew up, I think the importance of it, the awfulness of it, they became more aware of it. But they also dealt with their own guilt. They were dealing with their guilt. They liked what the priest was doing. They liked what they were doing to the priest. It was something that at the time when they were preteens and young teens, it was enjoyable to them. And so the part that I had never thought about was, we've looked at it as if it was something that was
violent,
just one way. Well, just one way, just one way. It was the priest getting his thrill. But what Brian and these other dozen Boy Scouts, 2 or 3 of the guys said, actually, I didn't want to say anything to because I was enjoying it, and I'm not going to get any more explicit than that. And so the problem with this group of kids was their own sense of guilt, that they wondered if they had been sinful. Were they committing serious sins because they were enjoying it?
Did all 13 say yes to that statement?
No, but they all were willing to write to the priest and forgive. Yeah.
That's a great story, Tim. Wow.
But and it was so, hearing him talk about that he got kind of repulsed me, to be honest. It was sort of repulsive to me. But it made me realize that this is really it's complicated. There's and he's the only one that I personally know that was ever, a participant in the sexual stuff that was going on. But he would not, at the early years, he would not have said he was being abused by the priest. That was not something he thought of. It was something that evolved as he grew up and became more mature. Is that, he's, so I'm just sharing that because it's ongoing. And Brian, Brian really believes that the pleasure he got out of it as a preteen kind of developed in him a same-sex attraction. I mean, he's married, he's got 5 kids, 10 grandkids, but he also has struggled his whole life with same-sex attraction. And he kind of is thinking, and he went to a lot of counties, he's kind of thinking that may have started there, with this priest, and it makes him feel even more guilty, So I'm just sharing that because this is something we've been talking about, just from a guy.
I'm listening to this and wondering if that quote abuser who's in jail now did
no, he's
not
dead.
have
He's now dead. Yeah.
Okay, his own sales pitch. In other words, he didn't force himself on anybody. He only had relations that way with those that seemed attracted to sex talk, whatever.
Don't know. I don't know that. Yeah, don't know.
Teenage
but
boys.
That's
just boys.
Interesting
Teenage
observation.
boys not interested in sex, huh? That's what makes it so pernicious. In that a knowing adult, in this case,
Right.
a priest.
Right.
That's what makes it so absolutely dangerous and soul killing. In I have heard as a therapist some of the stories, and it is soul killing, destructive. If you stop and if you stop and reflect, and stages of moral development where a preteen, young teenager male is with regard to a psychosexual development, messing with that development, that a sexual encounter with a person of God, with a man of God, who, as part of the sales pitch, most often would say, don't worry about this. I speak for God. It's not, I mean, this is so incredibly potentially destructive of what would we think of as a more healthy psychosexual development. That's what makes it so dangerous. If this person is really a pedophile, and that's an illness, that's a disease, and it's not really very treatable except through police tactics. It really isn't treatable. The only effective intervention for pedophiles is to have a probation officer or its equivalent for that person to try to continue to function normally, to report in. And that often is built into the situation for the people who know with regard to the treatment protocol. I mean, it's an insidious illness, disease for true pedophiles. I'm thinking of some of my colleagues from seminary who had one-time encounters, who were dismissed from the clerical state. They weren't pedophiles. I mean, it was like they get caught up in quote in sinfulness, and but were treated and accused the same way as if they had the illness. And I'm not saying that that one time isn't a very serious problem, because it is. The rule of thumb as therapists was basically, and the judges and the police, if a person talks about one-time sexual encounter, you don't believe them. You start searching for how many there were. And often there was more than one. But to say that there never was just one time and that made a difference, I think that there are some priests who, quote, sinned one time and who are no longer in the clerical state, that happened too. But it's so messy, it's hard to sort through, and so they get all lumped together.
Well, I think I agree with what Bob, I was going to say that the notion that these young people enjoyed the encounter, when in fact such an enjoyment could come, if they just joined each other in some sexual encounter, as teenage boys might well do.
Sure.
But that there was, a priest involved, or just the mature adult involved, is something that I don't think makes any difference in terms of the element of scandal or criminality or anything, with respect to that priest. And again, I think it's something we ought to be really careful about, because there's a suggestion, or I'm not saying you making the suggestion, Tim, and I'm glad you brought this up, but other people could see in it a suggestion that we're making excuses for the perpetrator, or at least trying to diminish, what he was doing, because after all, I mean, the kids were having fun.
And I hope that there was never. I hope that.
No, I didn't take it. I didn't take it as such. Okay. I took it more as you telling us the kind of complications there are in the broader view of the situation, and then Bob picking up on that and leading us along the road that he led us on. But it's very precarious for us to get into anything other than saying, we're priests, we're at the table, we have any sword, we just have to put down our head and say, it's like the gesture that I heard of the Irish bishop, who, after this was all revealed, determined that he would walk to every church in his diocese. So, I mean, he didn't walk. So at a certain point, a mile or two from one, but he never arrived at any church in his diocese other than on foot. He parked his car and got out and walked, and then did a penitential service for this kind of thing. There isn't any other answer to this other than that kind of gesture.
I think so.
So Gary and Tom and Johnny, we all were in school together 4 years plus. Do you think if any of our classmates were being abused, they would have said anything about it?
Hard to say. Wow.
It may be the person to ask might be Ned Shavira, because he has recounted to this group the encounter that Father Ed Danaher tried to initiate with him.
Opened the door to him with an open robe.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Something like that. Now, I think Ned basically said no thanks and ran away. But, how much else may have been going on within our own time in the seminary, I personally was not privy to.
Gary?
Yeah,
Did you ever hear even a whistle?
No, other than what, and I forget it, was it Bill Fraser, or was it, and I don't know, that something like that happened, but we were just talking about it at that time as this happened. You never, at that point, I don't think we had any clue. I mean,
What about the other three of you guys who were
But
in the
nobody
junior
really
seminar?
knows whether Danaher was successful in enticing somebody into something further.
What about you three guys that didn't go to school with us?
Well, in my early days in the seminary here, a lot of those, afterwards, I talked to a classmate and said I was shocked because I never felt I'd been approached. I don't know if I was insulted because I thought I was reasonably good looking, but anyway.
Are you bragging or complaining, Frank?
Yeah. And so, anyway, he said to me, I was like Tom, what Tom said. And this friend of mine was a very perceptive man. He actually left the diocesan priesthood, became a Jesuit, died he was a great spiritual director. He said, "Oh, Frank, there was a lot of sexual activity going on in the seminary. We were there."
Wow.
And on thinking back on it, I think there was a club. And whether you were in or out of the club, you were identifiable by a fairly expensive, highly tailored cassock. Rather than what we used to call the barrel back or the old Jesuit cassock, which looked like a blanket that you just put over you and tied up with a cincture. This one was very, very highly tailored. And many of the people who were publicly identified as having abused wore that cassock. And there was a certain, sense in which, had a very long train kind of as you walk down the chapel, it kicked out behind your shoes and that kind of thing. And I may be totally off on this, but I think that was the talisman that let people know as to whether or not you were in or out.
Wow.
If I can interrupt for a second, Tim and Tom and Gary, when did the term feminarian come to your attention?
I never heard it in my life. Never heard it.
What term?
Feminarian.
It
Never
came
heard
to
of it.
my attention about 10 seconds ago.
I never
Yeah,
heard of it.
I never heard it.
I'd never heard it either. No.
Well, I'll tell you, a bunch of jocks that I hung around with identified the people they felt were feminarians.
Oh,
I'm not going to mention any names right now, but they all left, as far as I know. Yeah,
The
I'm sure
feminarian,
The jocks or the
feminarians-
feminarians?
the jocks or the feminarians.
the feminarians all left. Some of the jocks stayed.
I'm thinking back to my wandering journey. I sampled 3 different seminaries. First one at the University of Ottawa, St. Paul's College. That was my first experience of being in seminary. And I'm thinking back, I was there a year, and 2 notorious pedophiles. One has since died. The other is still serving in prison. I mean, these were really notorious, were classmates at that time and also in first year of seminary. Also there, which I subsequently learned because he was a visitor to my home when he was doing a year of refreshment in theology. And this was a Canadian archbishop at the time, who was later dismissed. But he was a 4th year theologian at the time. And those were, and that was my first year of seminary in 1964, 65, 63, sorry, 63, 64. And then after that, I I spent the next 2 years in Rome, and I have no personal contact, no experience at the time. No stories, though I know subsequently that a number of classmates, colleagues were credibly accused, some dismissed from reading about it in the press. And
But
then
you did not go to seminary till college, right?
No, I did not. No, it's one
Okay.
of the.
What about you, Frank? When did you first go to seminary?
Well, I went to what was called the minor seminary after high school.
Okay. And what about you, Bob? When did you go for seminary?
I had a year and a half of Christian Brothers at the high school in Canton, and I desired at that point to become a Christian Brother. So I was off for 6 months for that. And at the end of the 6 months, that was kind of a transformation to go to the seminary and become a priest. My Jesuit uncle had tried to persuade me, wouldn't you rather be a priest, Bob, than a brother? That was kind of his thought. So then I had 2 years of high school at the seminary in Cincinnati, and then 2 years of college at the same institution, but the high school was in one building and the collegians were at another. And the only recollection that I have of anything that would be any kind of reference to this is there was one of the priests, and I don't even remember if he taught me something and when it developed, but I remember this priest that I had no particular relationship with him. He invited me over to his room, and he wanted to have a conversation, which we had it. I left. I have no idea. I have no recollection of whatever it was about. But then years passed, and I became a pastor of a Hungarian parish in Youngstown. And the Hungarians there are very tight, and they're very committed, and they're very strong in their faith, and they had nice families. And this one couple, and this guy was just a super good guy. He ran bingo and all that for us. And his son, I think his only son, went to the seminary. And he came home and he never went back to the church. And I'm convinced, I think they may have mentioned this to me at some time, that he was abused, their son. But as good Catholics, they never made an issue out of it. And so it was years later when I became aware of that, that I had a sense that that priest in that seminary was of that disposition. Happily, I never had any encounter that really got into it, but I think he was the source of this wonderful family losing their son in terms of any connection with the church. I don't remember any. I was down at Catholic U for 3 years. I don't remember any instance there. I was 4 years at the Gregorian North American College. I don't remember anything there. Some people might have disappeared, sent home, whatever it was, but I've never had myself, and I thank God for it, an experience.
Going back to what you said, Johnny, about the feminarians,
Yes.
I have a little figment of a memory somewhere in the back of my brain about one of our rectors, either we were freshmen or sophomores, kind of coming to us. Maybe we were then not in 3 different groups, but maybe in 2 groups or something, and saying that he had dismissed some guys because he didn't, it was vague, and it was like he dismissed them because they were too friendly with each other or something. Does that ring a bell?
That rings true.
Yeah,
It does.
yeah, no, that happened. Yeah.
When I was down,
But that
I
was
agree.
something among themselves. That was not
Yeah.
That was not what you're talking about here. That was
No. But that was the only thing that I was thinking about in terms of sexual behavior among us ninth graders and 10th graders. Was that,
Ninth and 10th grade, yes.
My
Yeah.
experience in Rome exactly matches what Bob said. I'm not aware of ever.
I'm gonna have
Good.
to bug out.
I gotta go.
Yeah,
I've gotta
we all
go
do.
too.
I'm aware it's 12:03, so fascinating time.
We'll have to see. We have to see what Fred Lawrence writes about this one.
Oh, boy.
Yes,
We'll get a few
Oh, boy.
pages.
can hardly wait.
Come on, Fred.
You're
Time flies
just
by.
God bless you
you're
all.
warming them up, Tim.
Take care.
Bye
I
bye.
doubt
Bye,
that
guys.
Lonergan got into that stuff, but maybe not.
Thank you.